anything to write with next to you or a place to take notes, but I suggest grabbing a pen and paper or getting something to take notes with. I know I have my pen and paper right next to me, but all right, we are at the top of the hour, so we are going to kick it off. Welcome to American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. I'm Maddie, and I am thrilled to have you with us today. For those of you that are familiar with DreamBank, welcome back. And for those of you that this is your first time joining us, welcome. Here at American Family Insurance, we believe communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. That's why we created DreamBank, an inspirational community destination and digital experience dedicated to dreamers everywhere. From our daily event series to immersive signature programs, there's something for every dreamer. Our always free offerings are designed to help you celebrate your dream journey, overcome obstacles, and stay motivated. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker. Paul Khan is a TEDx speaker, senior sales executive, and CEO of Yes I Can Coaching and Consulting, helping entrepreneurs accelerate their business through stages. Taking over a decade of experience managing 8-figure portfolios and billion-dollar brands from top Fortune 500 companies, he translated his experience into both business and leadership results with over 300 corporate and individual clients, from multi-million-dollar restaurants to CEOs to Olympians. Paul is on a mission to empower and inspire others to create their best version of an extraordinary life. All right, take it away, Paul.
All right, thank you so much for having me, Maddie. It has been at the DreamBank a few times now. It is always such a pleasure to be back, and just love the mission. So thank you, and welcome to my seminar today. It's an interesting one. It's called Epic Fail: How to Make Failure Your Secret to Success, and I think it's the perfect jump off point because we just came out of the Olympics where we got to see that on full display, not only success but also failure as well. And I think at the highest level, of course, globally. And I think for us, how do we be able to disseminate that into our daily lives? Because it isn't always, as we are approaching our lives, about winning an Olympic medal. Not all of us have the opportunity to go do that, but whether it's with our careers, whether it's with our relationships, whether it's with our dreams, whether it's with things that we want to do and achieve in our life, whatever success gets to look like, a big part of it that often doesn't quite get talked about is failure and the role that it plays. And what does it get to look like in terms of being in a relationship with failure? Is it, a lot of times, is it about avoiding it? Is it about facing it head on? What do we do with that? And it often isn't so much talked about because we very much are an achievement oriented society. We celebrate the gold medals, we celebrate the podium. Even for the greats, looking at Simone Biles, her being the greatest of all time, still received criticism when she got that silver at the end. And for many people that would be a dream come true, but depending on perspective, because of who she was and her previous achievements, some people view that as a failure. But is that really? And how do you be able to take what happens and your results and be able to have it work for you in a way where you get to take it and be able to continue to build off of it and continue to utilize what you learn from it and the event itself to be able to elevate you to new heights. So it wasn't very long ago, at 33, I never ever thought at 33 years old that I would be bagging groceries. So previous to that, I had 8+ years of experience running multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar brands. I've been in multiple different leadership roles, director roles, building startups, building big businesses, leading teams. I'd run my business for 4 years, built it up to 6 figures. And all it took was one of my biggest clients deciding not to follow through with their contract. And all of a sudden, I was left without a means to pay my bills. And a whole year later, after hundreds of applications to different jobs all across the country, even internationally, trying to scramble in different ways, shape, or form to try to find some source of revenue, I was left with absolutely nothing to show for it. And I was a hop and a skip away from moving my wife, my pregnant wife at the time, and my toddler son into my mother-in-law's basement. And that pressure was just crippling, and that pressure felt unsurmountable. And it wasn't that there was anything wrong with begging, it's just I realized that I was never prepared for this moment. I was never prepared to deal with failure. I was never prepared or taught, what do I do when the plan doesn't work out? What do you do when something happens that completely throws your entire journey into a loop, and you're left scrambling trying to figure out, what do I do now, since my plan A, my plan B, or even my plan C wasn't anything that my current reality looks like. And it felt crippling. There was times where I didn't know what to do, because my entire identity up until that point was completely tied to my achievements. It was tied to what I have created in my life, what I was doing, how I looked. And when I had none of that, and when I was feeling spent emotionally, physically, financially, it didn't feel like I had it within me to get up off that floor, to continue believing, to continue moving forward, just because the failure had felt so heavy and I had no clue how to get out of it. But for the very first time in my life, although this was by far the most high stakes failure that I had dealt with, and there was so much on the line, I realized that I also couldn't run. I mean, that could have been an option. I could have run, I could hide, but there was something else that was greater than me, that was calling me to somehow, some way, figure it out. And that was this little picture right here. This was this little guy who was on his way, that I haven't met yet. At that point, I didn't even have a name for. But there was something about looking at this photo, realizing that my son was on the way, that I realized that this wasn't about me anymore. This was bigger than me. I mean, at every other junction of my life, I probably would have quit. I probably would have laid down and just given up. Just figure that, hey, this is everything that I thought that was possible for myself. Maybe it was a lie. Start doubting myself, not seeing what was possible. But I realized that this time it was bigger than me. There was people that were depending on me. There was someone I haven't even met yet that is waiting for me to show up. And whether I liked it or not, the only way was through. And so at the lowest of the low, at that point, I realized that whether I liked it or not, whether I felt like it or not, I had to somehow summon the courage to be able to stand up and step by step figure out how I was going to face this failure head on, and how I was going to get through it, and how I was going to figure out how I can build a relationship with it, so that I can be able to move my life beyond it. And so, with my pride, putting that in my pocket, putting that to the side, after 15 minutes of summoning the courage, I went up to the counter at Woodman's and I asked them, can I have an application to work at your store and start off as a grocery bagger? And that moment, although the courage and the build up to it, there was so much shame that was tied to it previous to that. There was so much heaviness. There was so much, I can't believe I'm doing this right now at age 33, after everything that I thought that I had built up. How was I not good enough? And is this all that I was going to amount to? I realized that that moment was actually very freeing for me, because at that moment, I was able to detach what I thought my identity was in relationship to failure, and be able to redefine what failure looked like and where it was going to lead me to. And so after I let that go, and after I embraced it, and after I realized the biggest thing I can do right now is to be able to figure out how I get to work through this, how I get to find the tools to be able to build myself out and dig myself out of this, what started happening was this momentum that I never could have possibly imagined. Just 2 months after that, I landed 6 different interviews with Fortune 500 companies with multiple 6-figure roles. I had multiple job offers, and I was able to land a dream job of mine, being actually be able to build up brands, a brand new division of brands within a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And this is me just a few months after that, actually about 4 months after that, in Myrtle Beach at a VIP event at the country music festival there, being able to be in a place that was completely different, which was almost my mother-in-law's basement at that point, to realizing that, wow, in a short amount of time, the moment I stopped being afraid of failure, the moment I embraced it, the moment I realized that instead of running away from it, I can run through it, I can learn to be in relationship with it, I created results that were beyond my dreams. And the craziest thing out of that was that, aside from this opportunity that came up, was that my business was growing without me doing anything to it. I wasn't coming from a place of desperation anymore. I wasn't coming from a place of need to gripping onto it with all my life. Opportunities started to flow to me. People were reaching out to me, asking me to come speak, asking me to come present, asking me to be a part of what they were doing. And that was the most beautiful part of it. So what I wanted to really impart from that is that I love this quote around Thomas Edison. He said, "I have not failed. I have found 10,000 ways that won't work." And I think as a society, we have an opportunity, especially, we aren't usually taught about this. We're taught about how do we achieve, and when we don't achieve, then what? So I think today what I really want to do is share the knowledge and share my journey and share the things that I learned, the tools that really played a massive part from me being in the lowest of the low in my life to being in a place that I never could have imagined, doing work that I love, being around people that I really enjoy, really doing meaningful work and continuing to build my vision for the best version of myself and the life that I want to create. So in our journey today, I want to talk about two different things that I hope you'll be able to take away today. So one is, we're going to start with the relationship between failure and success. We talk a lot around success and the importance of it, why we need to continue to strive forward, but what does failure have to do with any of that? And that, I think, is a bit of a missing ingredient, a very important ingredient that we need to talk about. And the next component is, I want to be able to make it very practical for you and give you 3 steps that you can take away today if you are facing, and it doesn't have to be, something that is career related. Failure can be on so many different parts. It can be in our relationships. It can be with a personal goal of ours. It could be, in terms of with maybe our weight loss journey. It could be with anything that we are trying to achieve that, we are trying to strive for that we haven't quite gone there or we've fallen short with. I want you to be able to take away 3 steps that can take you from catastrophe to comeback. So things that you can tangibly do that when you are in those moments, and even if you're not in them today, that in the future you can take them and be able to utilize them so that you're not afraid of failure, so that you can utilize it for you to move forward and be able to have it propel you to new heights. So Professor Dashun Wang, he is a professor at the Northwestern University, and he did this research, and he did this entire paper on trying to figure out what is the prerequisite to success. And the really interesting thing is that he analyzed 776,000 grant applications, and he looked at 46 years of venture capital startup investments, and he wanted to see, hey, what really determines, what is the through line, what are the common patterns between grants and businesses that have been successful and those that haven't. And the really interesting thing, the through line, the biggest theme that he found out of all of these applications, all these data points that he was able to get through, was that every single success was once a failure. Failure played a part in every single success story, and it was the commonality between every single application, every single success story. And so what I want to say with this is failure is actually a needed, if not a prerequisite to success. And that's the part that often isn't talked about. And the really interesting thing was that there was a study that was done, and the sweet spot is that in order to succeed, we need to fail about 16% of the time, which is the goal, they call it the Goldilocks zone, which is they call it the perfect, call it a zone that you need to hit. Could be kind of around that. But if you fail too much, often what happens is that we get demotivated, we get discouraged, and it's very, very hard when we just don't have any wins. We keep failing, and it does take a toll on us. But if we're winning all the time, if we're successful all the time, and we don't face any failures, that also presents another challenge, which is that we're not challenged. We aren't in a place where we feel like we're growing. We're not stretching. We're staying safe. So failure does need to play. And when you think about research, when you think about when we are doing scientific studies, there is a margin for error. There is an expectation for failure. And it's interesting that we do that from a scientific standpoint. But whenever we go about with our daily lives, when we're going and trying to achieve our goals, we don't really factor in, hey, like, is there a margin for failure? What do I do in case of that? We don't really talk about that. So the other really interesting thing, though, is that although failure is a prerequisite to success, failure does not necessarily equate to success in terms of it does not guarantee that you will create success from failure. So the question that I wanted to ask, and as you think about it, I know we're on a webinar, so I might not be able to necessarily see the chat, but what do you think separates winners from losers? Give that thought for a second. What do you think separates winners from losers? The answer that we often get is, well, one worked harder than the other. The really interesting thing out of this study is that it actually wasn't persistence. So the people who failed, so call it the losers, whether it's from a game standpoint, if say we're playing a competitive sport, they didn't work less than the people who won. They actually a lot of times sometimes worked more than the people who were successful. So if it's not persistence, if it's not effort, if it's not hard work, then what is it? Well, what it really comes down to is that the differentiation between those that were successful and those that were not was that it was about not just the effort, but after the failure, making the necessary changes. And it only works if you learn from your failure. So it isn't necessarily, hey, you have to fail in order to succeed, so just keep failing, keep failing, keep failing. But it's about when you do fail, there's nothing wrong with failing, but what do you do about that? Where do you go from there? What do you change? What do you do different next time? And it only works if we're able to really take the learnings and squeeze the juice out of that lemon in order to make that lemonade. The other really interesting thing about the other factor that separated those that were successful and those that were not is the time between each failure, the time between each try. So they did this in the study. They looked at grants that have had 3 failures or more. And the really interesting thing is, based off of all these data points that they got, they were able to figure out, if you look at the timing between failures, they're actually able to predict whether or not you'll eventually succeed, which is super interesting. Because what they found is that the faster you fail, so the less time you have in between trial, in between each attempt, the more likely you're going to succeed. Because often when we dwell and we stay on that failure, what happens is that it festers. What happens is we start overthinking it. We start doubting ourselves. We start thinking, well, maybe that's just going to be how it is, or that fear just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, versus when we fail and we take the learnings from it and we try to move on quickly, at a time that works for us, right? Sometimes it's going to be a little bit slower than others, but the faster we're able to actually get back up on our feet, the more likely we're going to succeed, the more likely we're going to build momentum behind that. So from that, I want to take you through 3 different steps around how to go from catastrophe to comeback. And it comes down to an acronym, which is IBM. So identity, boundaries, and movement. So I want to talk about those 3 things: identity, boundaries, and movement. So let's talk about identity first. So the really interesting thing is that failure is oftentimes directly linked to our self-worth. And that's why failure is so hard to swallow. And that's why, for me, that moment when I had to go and I was standing at the counter and I was building myself up to it for a while around, man, like, is this something I got to do? Considering I'm not hearing back from other people, do I have to do this? And the working up point for me to go up to that counter and ask for that application to go work at Woodman's was the most terrifying. I felt sick to my stomach, And it wasn't because of the job itself, it was because how I related to that job. I looked at it as a direct failure on my part, and my self worth and my pride was linked to it. And I felt so ashamed around, man, is this the place that I am at right now in my life? And for so many of us, that is often the case. When we fail, it's personal. When we fail, we really are hard on ourselves because it's so directly linked to whether or not we're good enough. And so often there's two different achievement motives. There's either the need for achievement or there's the fear of failure. So when we are driven by the need for achievement, what often happens is that we equate the process and the journey itself as not what is most important. We're equating the result as what is most important for us, and as a result, whatever results we do create, we view them often as threatening, as judgment, because we are directly correlating our results with our experience of our self-worth. So our whole entire self is on the line of whether or not we achieve. And that's a lot of pressure. And often when we look at it that way, the need for achievement, what often happens is that the journey feels hard. It often is, even if we are achieving, if we're not hitting what we feel like is, the highest level that we expect ourselves to be at, what's missing often is that lack of grace. So it feels like work all the time, even though there may be results along the way. Now, on the flip side, there's also the fear of failure. Now, when we go for achievement, it isn't just about growth. It's not about improvement necessarily. It's more about the result. But when we go on the flip side and we're driven by fear of failure, what often happens is that when we have a high fear of failure, we play small. We hold back. We don't want to fail because failing would mean that we are not enough. It would mean that there's something wrong with me. It would mean that I'm inadequate. So we don't go too big. We hold ourselves back because we don't want to lose. So we're just playing not to lose, and we're not playing to win. And what happens on the other side of that too is that we're not stretching ourselves. We're not pushing ourselves to the next level, to our full potential. We're playing it safe. So we're not, really exploring what we can do beyond what we have seen evident to what we feel very confident to be able to do. So we're not also growing and improving in that way. So the thing that we really need to talk about, which is at the center of all this, the reason why we either feel like we have this need to strive for achievement or we have this immense fear of failure, is at the core of it is shame. And that was the case for me, was that there was so much shame around when I don't achieve. There was so much shame around when I don't get the results that I want. And it's because of all my life growing up, it was never about, hey, go out there and put out your best effort. It was never about the journey. It was always failure is not an option. And so that was so tied into my identity that when I don't achieve my goals, I felt an immense amount of shame. And that is very true for many of us. And shame, as Brene Brown talks a lot about shame and the importance of really being able to understand it and how do we really be able to separate ourselves or be in relationship with the shame and be able to separate our self-image from it, is that shame is really coming down to this conviction that you will never be enough, you're not lovable, and you'll never belong. And that's why it is so painful whenever we feel shame, and we'll often do things to try to avoid it. And it keeps us from this fear of failing, so we avoid it. But in turn, because we're avoiding failure, avoiding going too big, avoiding stretching too far, is that we end up making the same mistakes over and over and over, and we end up failing anyways, although we think that we're not because we're playing safe. Because what it ends up doing is it really just stunts our growth and our maturation of ourselves, and in terms of evolving into this next better, best version of ourselves. And we can often be very hard on ourselves, very unforgiving, and that affects not only our own relationship with ourselves, but our relationship with others, because how we do one thing is how we do everything. So how hard I was on myself, I was unknowingly also doing the same thing with people around me, with my wife. I had the same expectations, and that can be a lot of pressure. That can be very crippling, and that can really affect the relationships around you and how you relate with other people's results as well. So the one thing I want you to take away from this is that you are not your results. Those are your results, but you are not your results. And this is so important to take away because often we equate those as two. I am my results, I'm my achievements, I'm the things that I do or I don't do. But when we're able to separate it, it becomes neutral. It's a neutral event. Something happened, a failure happened, but I am not a failure. And that is a very important distinction from a language standpoint, from how we relate to failure and how we relate to our results. Because when we relate or when we are tied to our results, our identity, when we are at a high, when we are achieving, great. When we're not, that's not great. And so it's constantly this yo-yo up and down. But in order for, if you look at the greats of the world, the athletes, despite their failures, they don't, and in the moment they might, because all of us are human, but in the long run, when they move past it, they don't allow themselves to equate their worth and who they are at the core to their achievements. And that's when you truly are able to be invincible. And one of the things that was very, very powerful for me during this time of working through the challenges, the failure that I had in my business, the failure that I had of trying to figure out my career and providing for my family, everything that I tie myself worth to, was I had to learn to rebuild a relationship with myself and figure out my identity separate from my results. So one of the things that I started integrating into my routine every single morning, every time before I had a big presentation, before I had a big interview, before I was going to step up to the bat for something that was important to me, was I created a list of 50 reasons why I'm awesome. And it was very awkward for me at first. And I know for many of us it might be, because we don't sit around thinking that most of the time of, hey, you'll look at all these reasons for why I'm great. We're often, if anything, opposite, very hard on ourselves. So when you sit down and you make an intentional list of why you're awesome, not because of things that you've achieved, but who you are, how you show up in the world, you know, your gifts, your talents, your characteristics, your personality, all those different things that are separate from your achievements, and you start reminding that to yourself. And it's awkward at first. You're like saying these all the time. It's like, I don't feel like this is, you know, maybe true. This feels very awkward. And it does start out that way, but it's very much like going to the gym. When you're putting in the reps, you don't start out, you know, squatting 250, 300 pounds. It's going to feel very awkward if you've never squatted on a, you know, with a rack, right? And lifting weights. It feels very, very awkward at first, but it's not about it feeling awkward. It's about just putting in the reps. And the more reps you put in, the stronger you're going to feel and the more innate it's going to feel at one point, where it's just, you know, you just do it naturally. But all of us started at one point. You know, when we talk about the Olympics, they didn't all start off, you know, performing at the level that they did. They started with baby steps. But this level of developing ourselves, not, you know, externally, but internally, is the same process as well. So listing those 50 reasons, going through them every morning, making it a part of your routine, reminding yourself, even if your circumstances don't look like that in the moment, but believing and continuing to repeat to yourself over and over and over of why you're deserving, why you're worthy, why you're enough, why you're awesome, is huge. And over time, that was a huge factor for me. Whenever I go and I noticed my confidence level was different, my energy level was different, how I showed up was different. And that's because you are developing that self-belief in there, that confidence that is not attached to the circumstances on the outside. So the next piece after that is really talking about boundaries. And so boundaries is really important because of a few different things. Number one, we are in a world that is very, very noisy. And when we're going through challenges in our life, it is very easy to get swayed in 15 million different directions of why you aren't like XYZ and why XYZ over there is doing that and you're not, or, you know, you should be there by now. And it's all these things that are flooding and reminding you of why you aren't where you're supposed to be, and just continuing to build off of that narrative. And also the algorithms are built on that. The more you consume certain information, the more it's going to continue to spit out more at you. And it just becomes this very overwhelming environment to be in that feels very, very unsafe, especially when you feel like you're going through a challenge at that moment. And so something that was, you know, when we look at kind of the need for achievement versus the need for failure, when you look at things like social media, when you look at the news, when you look at things that are outside of us, it really does accentuate that. So one thing that is very, very important during this time, and we don't talk enough about often as a society, especially with so much noise these days and so many different platforms that you can be on, the internet, etc., and our phones, especially being right in our pocket, is protecting your peace. Protecting your peace. And what that means is that it's about creating boundaries. It's about creating boundaries in your life and giving yourself space so that if something isn't serving where you're at that moment, that you are creating space between you and that thing. So what that means is, like, for example, for me, when I was going through those challenges with my career, with my business, I noticed that one place that was very, very toxic for me was social media. When I go on, number one, we as a society are addicted to our screen. So we're scrolling and we're scrolling and then we're doom scrolling and then we're seeing everybody else. And I noticed that I was, number one, my blood pressure would go up. I noticed my heartbeat would be accelerated. I noticed I was feeling anxious. I was feeling overwhelmed, and I never felt great. It was kind of like sitting there on the couch eating an entire bag of Doritos. And in that moment, you just can't stop. But then the moment you're done, you're like, man, I feel terrible. And that's what I realized it was doing in terms of me being on social media, being part of certain social groups and things like that. And I realized that I had to create boundaries that, you know what, I can't control what happens outside of me, but I can create boundaries around who I can let in, who I can surround myself with, what kind of space I'm putting my mind in. And so it's really important as you're going through this to create a checklist for yourself to minimize social media, because social media, number one, can be very, very toxic, especially at times where we're very vulnerable emotionally. That is something that you want to make sure that you protect. So I started being off social media. I didn't put the pressure on myself to have to go and post or feel like I had to share anything. I'm like, I'm in my own space right now, and I got to be okay with not having to be on a platform which literally is built off of social validation. And so minimizing social media, which is whether you want to download an app on your phone and minimize the time frames you want to be on, or delete it off of your home screen, delete it off of your phone altogether. It may not be permanently, but maybe for that time period where it serves you to really be with yourself and figure out where you want to surround yourself. So the other thing, who do you want to surround yourself by? Maybe there's certain people that in that moment, I found that certain people were really triggering for me. Nothing wrong with them. It's just in relationship to where I was in my life at that point, being around certain people did not serve me. It didn't feel motivating. It didn't feel inspiring. It felt maybe overwhelming. Maybe at times it felt toxic, or it was creating a lot of anxiety for me. And so I realized that it was up to me to create those boundaries. And it's okay to say no sometimes. It's okay to say, hey, not today, or not right now, or not at this particular time. So who are you surrounding yourself by? Are you surrounding yourself with people who are uplifting you, people who see you at your highest, people who are pouring into you, people who are really nurturing, people who are really, speaking life and speaking, possibility and vision into your life? That is really, really important to figure out who you're surrounding yourself by, both virtually and physically as well. The next part is, what kind of content are you consuming? You think about the news that is around us. You think about it's everywhere, right? It's just such a noisy world. Really paying attention to, how does it make you feel? Do you feel inspired? Do you feel uplifted? Do you feel encouraged? Do you feel seen? Do you feel poured into? Do you feel full after seeing certain content? Or does it leave you feeling empty? Does it leave you feeling anxious, angry, upset, overwhelmed, worked up, really high anxiety, all that kind of stuff? If you notice that you're feeling a certain way, that's when you get to take a step back and say, hey, how do I get to set up certain boundaries? Maybe certain things are not serving me right now, certain kinds of content. Not that you're hiding from it, but say, hey, in this moment, I got to protect my peace, because I got to make sure I build myself back up, especially when you're going through challenges. I got to build myself back up and be able to really nurture the space that I'm in right now, so that I can, be able to move through it. So really creating strong personal boundaries. It's okay to say no, like I said, and it's not the time to people please, because the most important thing is you. And when you aren't able to really hold down your fort, you can't do the same for others. So the most important person that you really get to pour into during that time is yourself. So the last part is around movement. So it's really interesting when it comes to the neurological effects of success and failure. So it's been shown in studies that there's actually physical changes that happen in our nervous system when we create success, when we create results. It releases testosterone, it releases dopamine, and it actually changes the physical system within our bodies. So whether we win or we stay stuck, or whether we win or when we lose, our body responds in a certain way. Now, the great thing about this is that number one, it's not permanent, and number two, that there is something that you can do, because although it has shown in studies that when we lose or when we fail, that it does lower our testosterone and our dopamine, and it leaves us feeling a certain way, and we start feeling, low when we're feeling low energy. um, it doesn't mean that you have to stay there, and that's a really important thing to realize. And the great thing about being able to shift this energy, even though physically, neurologically, we feel a certain way when we fail, is that we can create momentum. And the best thing to be able to create momentum is to move, to create movement. Whether that's physically moving your body, that is something that has shown a lot of positive effects with going, working out, going for a walk, focusing on your physical health, really gets our energy moving and really shifts. A lot of times when we're feeling stuck, we go for a walk, we feel better afterwards, or it really opens up our mind to like new ideas. And that's because of that movement that we're creating, physically creating that movement. And there is this thing called the flywheel effect. The flywheel effect means that it's about combining enough small movements to be able to create one big, large movement. So a lot of times when we fail, when we have not achieved the results that we want, it feels insurmountable. It feels like this pie in the sky for us to go from where we are to where we want to go, to climb up that hill again. But the way to approach it isn't to take it on all at once. It's actually little steps, all one at a time, stacking one on top of each other. And over time, that builds the momentum. The little things coming, building together, then gives us the momentum. All of a sudden, we are rolling, we're rocking and rolling, and we didn't even realize that everything that we were doing up until now is now like almost like this avalanche that's coming down the hill. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that is the same thing for our momentum moving forward in our lives. So even if at the moment it seems completely bleak, and there's no way forward, taking one little step, stacking the little win at a time, makes all the difference for moving towards your goals, moving towards that next success. And so it doesn't have to be related to the goal that you have at hand. So sometimes a small win is, hey, I got up today and I brushed my teeth. That was great. I combed my hair and I brushed my teeth. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was that 100% looks different 100% of the time. It looks different every single day. One day you're 100%, maybe rolling out of bed, you're brushing your teeth and you combed your hair and you made yourself breakfast. That is 100% some days. Some days it's you being at your optimal level, being at the top of your game, getting 50 things done that day. But the problem that we have as a society is that we don't really talk about that it looks different every single day. So we always have this expectation that if I'm not performing at my highest optimal level, then I'm not productive, then I'm failing, then I'm not good enough, that there's something wrong with me today. So when we instead shift our focus to the small wins and focusing on what is one thing, 1% that I get to shift today, that I get to build on. I've been wanting to work out for a really long time. Hey, maybe today I'm going for a walk. Maybe tomorrow, I'm making myself a healthier breakfast, than stopping at a fast food chain. The little things, that's just the little win. Hey, today I got 500, I got 1,000 more steps than I did yesterday. Awesome. Little things like that really start stacking the wins, being your own cheerleader, and realizing that all of that matters. All of that is going to create that momentum to get you towards your next comeback. So just to summarize all that, it's identity. It's about who you believe you are, separating yourself from your results and reestablishing the identity of who you are despite it, who you are without it, who you are separate from it. Second is B, which is the boundaries, creating boundaries between you and the outside world, people around you, the devices around you, social media, internet, all the different things, all the different influences and noise around us, creating boundaries to really protect your peace. And the last piece is movement, focusing on those little things, little wins, stacking on top of them to create that momentum towards moving you from failure to success, from catastrophe to comeback. So one thing I want to leave you with is that our success isn't determined by the absence of failure, but it's by our response in the presence of it. So thank you so much. And I really hope that you can really take this away and know that no matter what happens, what goes on, you have everything within you to be able to not only make it through it, but really be able to achieve your next peak, your next mountain, your next best version of the life you want to create.
Thank you so much. I know that I definitely was taking a lot of notes, and especially for the season of life I am with a little at home. You are not your failure is, I think, going to be my new mantra, specifically around dinner time and trying to get my little to eat whatever I put in front of him. That seems to be our biggest challenge right now, and I always come to it with the most grand ideas, and it's hard to always walk away feeling like I did a good job. So I think that is going to just be my mantra for this next season of life. But thank you so much. I know I want to start working too on my list of 50. So I really appreciate this and the learnings and excited to start implementing them. So thank you everyone for joining us. And until next time, friends.
See ya.